The story begins with a man who had almost nothing left, a drifter. Some called him a farmer whose land had withered to dust under a pitiless sun, the earth cracking, his crops turning brittle and brown. He had once carried hope like a lantern, but each passing year had dimmed it until only a faint glow remained. Others in town called him a fool, a man too stubborn to quit, even when life had taken nearly everything from him. And then one day, with the last of his savings clenched tight in his trembling hand, he made a choice that raised more than a few eyebrows. He bought what no one else wanted, an abandoned train station, standing lonely at the edge of the prairie like a skeleton of better days. It wasn't much to look at. The roof sagged under the scars of countless storms, wooden boards curled and split, weathered to gray by decades of rain and sun. Windows hung heavy with dust, more shadow than glass. The platform groaned beneath its own weight, as if it still remembered the boots of passengers, the trunks dragged across its planks, the laughter, the tears, echoes of a life long gone. The townsfolk laughed behind his back. What good's a pile of rotting wood and rusted iron? They scoffed. The railroad pulled out years ago. There's no heartbeat left in that place. But the man didn't listen. He stood on the platform in the dying glow of evening, staring down the rails that stretched like scars across the land. They disappeared into the horizon, broken, half swallowed by weeds, as though the earth itself wanted to forget them. And in that silence, when the wind rattled the loose tin, when crows circled overhead, he felt something no one else did, a weight, a presence. The station wasn't just abandoned, it was waiting. At night it changed, the moon spilled silver across the rails, and in that glow the man swore he could hear it. The faint whistle of a train that hadn't run for decades, a low moan of iron, the shuffle of phantom boots against the platform, the murmur of voices belonging to no one living. It was unsettling, yes, but it pulled at him like a magnet. The longer he stayed, the more he felt the station whispering, drawing him closer to something hidden, something buried. And so his fate was sealed the moment he stepped across that threshold. He thought he was buying a ruin, but he was really stepping into a secret buried for nearly a century. Long before the drifter ever set eyes on it, that station had a soul. It wasn't just a building of wood and iron. It was a pulse, a heartbeat on the prairie. It rose in the late 1800s, hammered together by men who chased the promise of the frontier. Men with calloused hands and sweat running down their backs, laid each beam, drove each spike, and painted its walls a crisp white that gleamed under the relentless sun. To them, this station was more than a depot. It was a declaration that life could take root here, that civilization had finally carved its mark into the wilderness. Back then, a station was salvation. Its whistle cut through silence like the voice of God. That sharp cry meant letters from loved ones, news from distant cities, packages of medicine that could save lives. It meant barrels of flour, coal, and salt that could decide the fate of a winter. Trains carried families seeking new beginnings, soldiers bound for wars, and drifters chasing fortunes they'd never find. And sometimes locked away in armored cars under the watchful eyes of armed guards, it carried shipments of payroll, silver, or gold, wealth that could change hands in an instant, if only someone was bold or desperate enough to try. For years, the town thrived. The station's platform was alive with laughter, tears, greetings, and farewells. Shopkeepers stocked their shelves with goods carried off the trains. Saloon doors never stopped swinging. Children waved at engineers leaning from iron engines as they thundered westward. Every arrival was a celebration, every departure a reminder that not all who left would return. The tracks were veins of steel pumping life into the heart of the town, and this station, standing proud against the endless horizon, was that heart. But the frontier is merciless. Time, like the rails themselves, bends and shifts. When new lines were laid farther south, the trains stopped coming. First one skipped stop, then another, then they vanished altogether. Businesses closed their doors, families packed wagons and moved on, chasing opportunities that lay elsewhere. The saloon grew quiet, the schoolhouse closed its shutters, the town thinned until it was little more than a ghost of itself. The station, once the crown jewel of the prairie, was left behind to wither. Its paint flaked away until it was nothing but splintered gray wood. Its roof sagged under storms, windows shattered and never mended. The platform moaned under the weight of windstorms as though the wood still remembered the boots and trunks it once bore. Rust devoured the tracks, and weeds pushed through the ties like veins reclaiming what the steel had stolen. But the silence gave birth to something else. Stories. Some swore that an entire gold payroll meant for soldiers vanished while sitting in the station's lock room one summer night. No record of it ever reaching its destination. No trace of the guards who watched over it. Others whispered that the station was once a hideout for outlaws who had botched a train robbery on those very rails. In their retreat, blood was spilled, and the shadows of the station became their last refuge. There were even darker tales of bodies buried shallow beneath the tracks, men silenced because they knew too much, their ghosts restless in the dirt. And then there was the lawman. One story claimed he had chased a gang into the station, determined to bring them to justice. He was never seen again. Some said he was gunned down and buried beneath the foundation itself. Others said his spirit still wandered the halls, badge glinting faintly in the moonlight. Most dismissed these tales as frontier tall-taw, the kind of yarns drunk men spin when the fire burns low and the bottle runs dry. But those who dared to stand close to that station after dark, they felt different. The wind carried strange sounds down those abandoned rails. The groan of timbers, the faint echo of boots striking the platform. Sometimes, when the moon was sharp and silver, the mournful wail of a whistle could be heard, though no train had run there in decades. Those who pressed a hand against the beams, still scarred with what looked like bullet holes, swore they could feel a weight, a presence, as though the wood itself had soaked up every drop of blood, every secret, every stolen breath, because that station was more than wood and steel. It was more than nails and rust. It was a witness, a silent sentinel to the rise and fall of dreams, and for anyone who dared step inside, it felt less like a ruin and more like a place that was waiting for someone reckless enough or desperate enough to listen to its whispers. The man who bought the station was no stranger to hardship. Once he had worked a patch of land just beyond the edge of town, a modest farm, nothing grand, but enough to dream on. He'd plowed the fields with his own hands, coaxed corn and wheat from the stubborn soil, built barns that smelled of hay and hope. But the land is a cruel partner. When the rains stopped, his crops withered. When the winds came, they stripped his earth bare. His barns collapsed into hollow frames, gray and broken like the ribs of some long-dead beast. He tried to hold on, but the dust won. With his farm gone, he drifted. Odd jobs kept him alive, mending fences, hauling timber, digging graves when the churchyard filled. He worked wherever a man who could earn a few coins to buy bread or a bowl of stew, but fortune never lingered, and hardship followed him like a shadow he could not shake. So when word spread that the abandoned train station was up for sale, sagging and silent at the edge of the prairie, folks thought hunger had finally driven him mad. The seller all but begged someone to take it, the price so low it felt like a joke. Might as well pay a man to haul it off, they said. Yet the drifter pulled out the last of his coins, sweat-polished, worn thin from years of passing hands, and signed his name. The town laughed. They laughed in the saloon, tankards slamming against tables. He'd lost his wits. What's he want with a ghost shack, one asked. Nothing in there but bats and splinters, another said, and then there were the whispers, low and uneasy, the darker talk, that the place was cursed, that men who lingered too long inside came out changed, if they came out at all. but the man did not care. Where others saw ruin, he saw shelter. A roof against the rain, four walls against the wind, a place where a weary soul might lay his head, perhaps even the faint chance to begin again. That first night he spread his bedroll on the warped wooden floor. Dust rose like smoke with every step. The air clung heavy, thick with the sharp tang of rust and the sour bite of mildew. The walls creaked as though they resented his presence. Broken windows let in the night air, and the prairie winds moaned through shattered panes, rattling loose nails and whispering across the weeds that clawed at the rails outside. He told himself it was only the wind, only the settling of old boards. But near midnight, his eyes snapped open, his breath caught. From far off, so faint it might have been his imagination, came the sound no man in that town had heard in years. A train whistle, long, low, mournful, the kind of sound that carried deep into a man's bones, stirring something old and uneasy. He sat up, listening hard. The silence pressed in, heavy. Then, against the floorboards, he felt it. A hum, the faintest vibration, like the echo of iron wheels rolling across buried steel. He pressed his ear to the floor. The boards thrummed softly, insistently, as if the station itself remembered what had once thundered along those tracks. His heart hammered. He stumbled outside into the cold night air, boots crunching on gravel. The horizon lay dark, endless. No light, no smoke. The rails stretched empty, vanishing into shadow. No train had come, no train ever would. The man stood in that silence, the whistle still ringing faintly in his ears, his skin prickling as though unseen eyes were watching from the platform shadows. Slowly, he went back inside, bolting the door against a night that carried sounds from another time. He had bought the station for shelter, but the station had other plans. It began with little things. One morning, as the man swept dust from the wide, hollow hall of the station, his broom snagged on a board near the far corner. At first, he thought it was warped from years of weather, but when he stepped on it, the plank shifted, loose, not broken, almost as if it had been pried open once before. He crouched low, pressing his hand against it. Beneath, the earth was darker than the rest, disturbed, unsettled, like it had been turned by human hands long ago, or he told himself it was nothing, just rot, just age. But even as he moved on, the thought gnawed at him. Someone had hidden something there. Someone had dug and covered it back up. Later, as he patched a support beam with his knife, scraping away the soft wood, he uncovered something stranger still, carvings, not letters, not full words, but symbols, crude, jagged marks etched deep into the timber. At first they looked random, but the more he stared, the more they resembled initials, or maybe a code. He ran his fingertips over the grooves, the sharpness still there after all these years, and for the first time since setting foot in that station, he felt cold crawl through his bones. And then came the nights. The prairie has its sounds, wind over grass, coyotes yipping at the moon. But what he heard wasn't that. Lying on his bedroll, staring into the rafters, he caught it, faint, metallic, a clink, then silence, then another, as though iron struck iron far below the surface of the tracks outside. He told himself it was nothing more than the earth shifting, but his gut told him otherwise. Word spread in town that the drifter was patching up the station, and with the whispers came stories. In the saloon, old men leaned close over whiskey-stained tables, voices dropping to a hush. One told of a robbery in 1892. A band of masked men forced a gold payroll off the cars right there on that very platform. Shots rang out, blood was spilled, but when the smoke cleared, the gold was gone, never found. Another claimed a payroll officer locked himself inside the station's strong room one night and was never seen again. The door was later found ajar, the ledgers half burned, the safe empty, and then there were the darker tales, whispers that the station had been used as a gang hideout, where walls heard oaths sworn in blood and rafters shook with the echo of gunfire. The man tried to shrug it off. Whiskey talk, nothing more. But the stories stuck to him like burrs. He couldn't shake them. And then came the map. It was hidden behind the crumbling plaster of the ticket office, a folded scrap so old it cracked like autumn leaves when he pried it free. His hands trembled as he smoothed it open. Ink faded and bleeding, lines shaky, drawn by a hurried hand, but clear enough. There it was, a crude sketch of the station, its walls and the ground around it, and beneath the stretch of track, marked in faded black ink, was an X. From that moment on, sleep abandoned him. Every creak of the walls became a signal. Every gust of wind rattling the glass was a whisper urging him closer. The groan of the rails no longer sounded like age. It sounded like warning. And with that urgency came something heavier, a presence. At night, lying in the dark, he felt it pressing down on his chest, cold, heavy, suffocating, as if someone or something didn't want him digging any further. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not with the map. Not with the carvings. Not with the clink of iron in his ears. He told himself it was madness. He told himself it was danger. But another voice, deeper, insistent, louder than fear itself, whispered the truth. He was close. Too close to walk away. For days the man wrestled with the decision. The map weighed heavy in his pocket. The strange carvings burned in his memory, and the stories whispered by old men around smoky tavern tables pressed in like ghosts. Gold, they said, silver, blood, curses, a fortune buried where steel-kissed earth, where trains once roared and vanished into legend. But he also knew this. Some things are buried for a reason. To disturb them meant crossing into a place where men were never meant to tread. A place guarded not just by locks and iron, but by time itself. Still, curiosity is its own kind of hunger, and hunger has a way of gnawing a man down to the bone. One night when the town lay sleeping under a cold, watchful moon, he gave in. He lit his lantern, its flame sputtering against the drafty walls of the station, and carried his spade out to the tracks. The rails glimmered faintly in the starlight, stretching endlessly into darkness like veins of steel and bone. He stopped at the place marked on the map, the X. His pulse thundered in his ears. With one last glance at the silent station, he drove the spade into the soil. The sound was wrong, hollow. It rang too sharp for mere earth. He froze, lantern swaying, sweat already prickling along his brow, though the night was cool. The silence around him deepened as if the whole world leaned closer to listen. He dug again and again. The dirt grew softer, looser, darker, as though someone before him had disturbed it and then covered it back up. His breath quickened, each strike of the spade a drumbeat in the night. Hours slipped away. His hands blistered and bled. His back screamed with pain, but obsession drove him on. Then clink, not stone, not root, metal on metal. His heart lurched. He dropped to his knees, clawing at the soil with raw fingers, pulling back clumps of earth until at last the lantern's trembling light revealed a shape. Hard edges, iron straps, a chest. It was old, older than him, older than the station itself, maybe. Wood blackened by fire and water, its surface scarred as though it had been dragged through battlefields. The iron bands still clung stubbornly, though rust had eaten them thin. The lock was nothing more than a corpse of iron. One hard strike of the spade shattered it. He hesitated, breath coming fast, his whole body trembling as though the chest itself were alive and waiting. Then, slowly, with both hands, he pried the lid open. The hinges screamed like tortured souls, and the lantern light spilled over what lay inside. Gold. Rows of bars stacked like bricks of captured sunlight. Coins spilled from rotted canvas sacks, scattering like fallen stars. Silver gleamed among them, relics wedged between the wealth. engraved pistols dulled with tarnish, pocket watches still clutched shut, ledger books swollen with mold, yet stamped with seals of railroads and banks long gone. The glow of it seared his eyes. He stumbled back, gasping, nearly dropping the lantern as it shook in his hand. He had done it. Against every warning, every story, every ghost that whispered in his ear, he had proven them true. The legends were real. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. The weight of centuries pressed down the treasure, glittering like fire in the dark. Then, from somewhere out on the open night, a sound rose, a low whistle, faint, mournful, carried on the wind. Though no train had run this line in decades, the man's blood turned cold. And in that moment, as the lantern flickered and the treasure burned before him, he knew he was not alone. Word spread fast, as it always does in small towns. The man tried to keep quiet, swore to himself that no one would know. But secrets have a way of leaking through walls, especially when gold is involved. Within days, whispers turned to rumors, and rumors turned to certainty. The drifter had found something under that old station, something worth killing for. Some claimed they saw him flashing coins at the mercantile, paying for supplies with gold pieces so old they bore the faces of forgotten presidents. Others swore he'd hauled crates from the station at night, loading them onto a wagon before disappearing down the road. The stories grew wilder with every telling. One version had him rich beyond measure, living in a hidden cabin stacked floor to ceiling with gold bars. Another painted him as cursed, haunted by the ghosts of the men who died for that treasure. There were even whispers that he'd gone mad, sitting alone in the station, counting coins that weren't really there at all. What no one could deny was this: he had changed. His shoulders hunched lower, his eyes darted quicker, and he spoke to no one. He bolted the doors at night, boarded the windows, and carried a pistol on his hip at all times. Then came the lawmen. A deputy rode in from the county seat holding old records of train robberies and payroll thefts that had never been solved. Some of the coins the man used in town matched descriptions from those reports. The law wanted answers, but answers never came easily. Neighbors grew suspicious. Men who had once laughed at him now eyed him with envy and something darker. A few even gathered in hushed circles, whispering plans to relieve him of his burden. The drifter found himself trapped, too poor to leave it all behind, too frightened to share, and too proud to admit the truth. The gold had made him a target, and every shadow, every stranger on the street felt like a threat. He had gone searching for a second chance. What he found instead was a prize that chained him tighter than poverty ever could. No one knows for certain what became of the man after that night. Some say he lived quietly for a time, spending carefully, hiding most of what he found. They claim he bought a small farm on the edge of the valley and tried to build a new life, always looking over his shoulder, always listening for footsteps behind him. Others tell a darker version. That one morning, the townsfolk found the station doors hanging open, the place deserted. His bedroll was still there, his lantern burned low on the table, but the man himself had vanished. No wagon tracks led away, no word ever came from him again. It was as if the station had swallowed him whole. There are those who believe the gold cursed him, that the spirits of the men who died for it rose up and dragged him down into the earth. A few swear he was hunted by old gangs who never forgot their stolen fortune, or by lawmen who wanted the treasure back for themselves. The truth is lost, buried under time and dust. But the legend remains. Travelers passing through still glance toward the broken silhouette of that station, half hidden by weeds and rust. Some dare to step inside, chasing the same whispers he once heard. They poke at the floorboards, scrape at the walls, hoping to find a glint of forgotten wealth. And sometimes, just sometimes, they claim to hear something they can't explain. A faint clink beneath the ground, like iron brushing iron, the low hum of rails that haven't carried a train in decades, the mournful echo of a whistle carried on the wind, and the story grows. Folks say treasure still lies hidden along the old rail lines, caches buried deep where bandits once roamed. Some insist that fortune favors the bold, that anyone willing to risk it all might strike gold in the forgotten bones of America's railroads. Others warn that what lies buried should stay buried, because some secrets don't like to be uncovered twice. And sometimes on nights when the wind howls down those abandoned tracks, folks swear they can hear the rumble of a train that hasn't run for 100 years, still guarding what's left of its lost treasure.